We appreciate your coming to Lafayette today.
Thank you, Ruth. Believe me, it's a long way, too, that I come. I want to say welcome to all you folks. Welcome to Lafayette. Name's Brown, Elam Brown. And I'm 193 years old, in case you didn't know that. Got a few words of wisdom for you. It's what Ruth said that I should come down here and do. And first word of wisdom, I guess, is that it says here that it's all right to eat cookies if you break them first so the calories all run out. Now, I hope I got the right set of notes. Last time I gave this talk, it was before the Weight Watchers. But all right, I'm 193 years old. It's not very long. And one point I want to make to you, I guess, is that it's just filled in a little gap. Some people say that I founded the town of Lafayette, and I reckon that's probably right. Although I've never been much given to bragging about things, but since I was the first one around the area, I guess that's what they say, and they call me Squire, and I don't mind if you call me Squire, as I say I don't like to brag, but Squire seems to always been kind of nice to me. There's been some little confusion about some of the things that I did, though. I think, well, a lot of you people have things to do with history. You might know the history is gossip, is what I read someplace, and I coined that actually, but some other people took the credit for it. So, but I don't care about that. There's a lot of stuff in the history books that's not true, and if you read anything about Elam Brown, you know he doesn't like things that aren't true, and then I'll clear some of those things for you. And once in a while, why, if you don't mind, I'm going to have to take a look at my notes, too. My memory started going when I was about 150. Remember I said I was 109. That's about the time I grew the beard. I didn't have the beard when I was down here in Lafayette, so don't get confused with that. You get kind of tired of shaving after 150 years or so that's what I start doing that. And I'll start at the beginning and go right through to the end. When I get to the end, I stop. I made that up too, but somebody else got the credit on that. You can get a lot done if you don't care who gets the credit, which is something else that I made up, but somebody else got the credit on that. But I was born in Herkimer County, New York. I have a Scottish grandfather, a lot of Scot in me. It was June 10th, 1797. People talk quite a lot about history in California, and it seems like California is almost a sort of an island that just floats on by itself and doesn't pay much attention to what's going on in the rest of the world. Well, let me tell you, we did. California wasn't just all by itself. Back in that time, June 10th, 1797, that's only about another couple of years, and I'm going to be 200 years old, Ruth. I expect maybe we'll have a big celebration maybe on the bicentennial. I hadn't thought about that. At any rate, when I was born, to get you into the right time frame, you'll have to realize that George Washington was still alive. He was retired, but he was still alive, and he was living down in Mount Vernon. John Adams was the president, and Thomas Jefferson was vice president. Now this is when I was born. So I'm going to try to tie this all together. If I can. Got a few aches and pains. Thank you, Tony. I get tired of holding my cane sometimes. Hold it all together and show you that we just filled in a little, whenever we come around here, we just fill in a sort of little gap. Incidentally, it seemed like my life just ran through a series of wars, and I think everybody's life does. And that's one thing I meant when you talk about being out in California like an island, you forget that. When I was a little fella, people talked about the big war that time, the one they were talking about was, of course, the Revolutionary War. We beat the pants off England and sent them back to skedaddling out of the place, you know. And if you recall that, why General Lafayette helped out a lot. I seen him once when I was a little boy back in New York and never forgot it. And it might have had a good deal to do with naming the town after him too. I wasn't the one that named the town. Benjamin Shreve was the one that came up with it. Remember, Benjamin Shreve was a storekeeper in Lafayette. We tried to call it Centerville at first, and sure glad we ended up with Lafayette. Sure sounded like a heck of a lot better than Centerville anyway. I'm not getting ahead of myself. Say my father was a farmer back in Herkimer County in New York, and he worked awful hard in Herkimer County and never could get ahead. And this happens a lot to farmers, I guess. And so when I was a little tyke, it was in 1798, we packed up from New York and moved up into the Berkshire County in Massachusetts. And apparently, as it turned out, my dad just traded one pile of rocks for another pile of rocks. Nobody told him about the rocks up in Massachusetts, and every time you plow, why, more rocks keep coming up. In fact, they had the story about the I guess that was true too. This is not the one that I made up. Was a Scotsman, which was my father, and an Irishman, because it's getting close to St. Patrick's Day, and they both were farmers. They both had a lot of rocks, and they had these rock sleds that they pulled behind a team, so when you plowed up the rocks, you put them on the sled. You didn't have to lift them so high like putting them in a wagon. Well, the Scotsman took all his rocks and put them down in his barnyard, and the Irishman just dumped them in a ditch. When they got all finished some years later, why, the Scotsman had this beautiful stone house and a stone barn and stone walls around it and everything else, and the Irishman, he had just had a ditch full of rocks. Say, that's not the one I made up. That was really supposed to be there. So, farmers got tired of all these rocks. I guess my father got tired of building all the walls and things. So, and they heard about good bottom land that was out in Ohio, and they said the topsoil was so deep out there that they could plow and never hit any rocks, and that sounded pretty good to the people in Massachusetts. So a whole bunch of farmers got together and moved out farther west in Ohio. This was the second move that had happened to me since I was a little tyke. And remember, this was in 1804 now. I was 7 years old. And Ohio was the frontier back then. It was all practically nothing but forests. And I still remember traveling through all those big trees. I rode in the back of the wagon because I was too little to walk. Everybody else did. It was 700 miles that I had to ride in the back of the wagon. We finally got to a place about 25 miles west of Granville, they called it, right out in the middle of the woods. And we called that place the Berkshire Settlement because all the people there were from the Berkshires in Massachusetts, and that was where we came from, of course. Well, then the British came back again after a while and started kicking up another fuss. Started another war in 1812, burned down the White House and things like that. I was 15 years old. I wanted to go this time. I thought this might be a chance that I'd get in on it. My father wouldn't let me go because he said I was too little and I had to work on the farm anyway. So I stayed there, and he was awful glad we'd moved to Ohio and gotten off of the eastern seaboard where all the fighting was going on. When we worked awful hard in Ohio, my father finally wore himself out in 1815. I was 18 years old then when he died, and I had to take care of my mother, and I really wanted to take off on my own, but figured that I should stay there and take care of my mother, so I did until I got to my majority. When I was 21 years old, well, I moved out, and mother moved in with some of the neighbors from Berkshire, and I never saw my mother again. I went to St. Louis from Granville in Ohio. I walked all the way. It was 500 miles through the forest. This was 1818 now. St. Louis was just a little French trading post on the river, and I didn't know nothing except for farming, you know, so, and there wasn't much for a farm boy to do in town, and I worked on the rafts in the Mississippi River through that winter, but the river was awful cold in the winter time with the wind and the ice and things, and I wanted to go back to farming, so I went on back into Illinois, into Madison County, and did some sharecropping for a while. People out here in California probably don't know what sharecropping is, but back there, somebody owns the land and somebody else raises the crops, and you give the landlord half, so you don't end up with a whole lot when you do a lot of work sharecropping. It wasn't much fun, but after a while I moved on up to Apple Creek and started to get a little older now. I was 26 years old, still rattling around, working on the river and working out in the farm, and I needed a wife. I decided off the bat what I had to have make me settle down. I married then, June 10th, 1823, I married Sarah Elam. Well, about that time they had another war started up. This time didn't seem like it had too much to do with us. It was between Mexico and Spain. Mexico wanted to pull away and start up their own country, much like we had done with the British. And I figured, well, war didn't have very much to do with me, and didn't pay much attention to it, and it wasn't one that I wanted to fight in that time because I had a wife now. It wasn't until later in my life that I found out that war was going to have something to do with me. Well, after we got married, Sarah and I decided to have a fresh start, and what if this thing comes out here, get back problems, you know, it's easier. That's much better. Fellas got to keep moving around once in a while. Well, we all the good land around Apple Creek been pretty well used up. So we heard there was some other good land up in Morgan County, still up in Illinois. It was about 25 miles farther north. So we went up there. Now Illinois had just become a state about that time, and they were setting up some new county governments, and they got me hooked into that. And when the money got short, well, I'd go up and work on the lead mines up in Wisconsin in the summertime, but mostly I farmed in Morgan County, and after we set up the new government there, I spent 12 years in Morgan County as a justice of the peace. Well, then that place started to fill up pretty bad with people, and soil wasn't as good there in Illinois as we originally thought, so in 1836, Sarah and I decided that we'd move farther west. There was another war, of course. There's always wars. This time it was between Texas and Mexico. Now Texas wanted to have their own republic, you see, just like everybody else. We were just starting off. In fact, the day we were starting off, we heard about the battle that they called the Battle of the Alamo later, where Davy Crockett got killed and a bunch of other guys down there. So Sarah and I pulled up stakes anyway. We went down to a place they called the Platte Territory down in Missouri. Cleared off 180 acres right on the Missouri River. And that's where we figured we were going to stay for the rest of our days. We got tired of moving around. Then they made that blasted place a state and started setting up a county government there. And every time I moved, I say, why do you always start a war and set up a government? So they hooked me into working in that government too, because all my government experience back in Illinois, you see, so I helped out, and I was pretty good with advice, mostly. But it was very sad for me out on the Platte after a while, after we lived there a while, because my wife, Sarah, got consumption and she died just about the time everything started going real good. And the place wasn't the same anymore. And we used to see the big Studebaker wagons come along the river, and they'd cross and they'd head out west, and a lot of people around us were starting to get the bug to do that, and I got this sick every time I looked around. This was about in the early 1840s, and so a bunch of us got together around on the Platte, and we said, let's make up a train, head out, and go to California. California was a place that kind of people heard about, was sort of mythical and didn't quite know much about it, except it wasn't even in the United States, but nobody seemed to pay too much attention to that. We figured we'd just go ahead and go. And I sold the farm, bought one of those wagons, and I hid the money I made from the farm inside of a clock, because they talk about there were a lot of Indians on the way to California to take everything you had. Well, when the wagons got together, it looked just like it did back in 1804, back in Berkshire County, when the whole neighborhood moved to Ohio. And because of my experience, and also the fact that I was the oldest guy around, they made me captain. So I became what they called the wagon master, and I didn't know nothing about wagons. And we started out May 1st, 1846. We had 14 families and 16 wagons. It was very pretty, see them all going. And there I was, the wagon master, and supposed to lead them out to California. Didn't have the foggiest idea where that was, just head west, and everybody knew which way west was, and that's what we did. Well, we're out in the middle of the Kansas territory when another war started up we didn't know anything about, which turned out was going to be a very important one to us, is when the United States then declared war in Mexico. That was May 13th, 1846. It was just 12 days after we left St. Joseph, so there was no way we'd know about it. Now, as it turned out, without us knowing it, our country was at war with the place that we were going to go to settle, which was California, you see.
Elam,
Yes,
there's
sir.
some final things. If you would hold that mic a little bit further away from your mouth, that would work better.
Right there, is that
I
good?
think that's
Is
good.
that better? Sorry about that. How am I going to learn stuff like that if I don't have young fellows like you to show me? Well, we'll go a lot into the trip. The trip was quite a story in itself and didn't have a whole lot to do in California, but just say one night while we lost all of our cattle because they got stampeded by a bunch of buffalo. We lost 120 head, spent a couple weeks looking for them. Another time, a bunch of other wagons joined us, and I guess they thought they were heading for Oregon. We had 30 wagons all together, and about that time we met what they figured was about 300 Indians, all on horses, all on horseback, and they arrived. They advanced in a trot, and there were so many gun barrels and all their dress glittering at a trot out there that it was scared us half to death. It looked like stars out on the sea. And we formed up two lines, waited for them to get closer, and still didn't know what to do. Finally, when they got within about 25 feet, I just held up my hand and they stopped. Well, they hauled out Chief came down there and he hauled out a peace pipe, and I sat down with him and smoked it with him. It was a god-awful thing, and I started getting sick. Smoking, I never smoked before, never smoked since. Got so I just couldn't stand it anymore. I just stood up and motioned with my hands for them to get out of the way, and they did, you know. They moved out of the way, and we all loaded up back in our wagons and rode off on down toward the west again, and didn't look back, and I don't know whatever happened to those Indians. And that's the whole tale about the Indian thing. Well, we arrived in California in 1846 on October 10th. Fortunately, we got to California before the weather got bad over the mountains, and after we crossed over the Sierra, we went down and camped down a place they called New Helvetia for a couple of days, which was just a few miles from Sutter's Fort. We bought some fresh supplies from Sutter, and we sat around a campfire talking about what we were going to do next. You know, now we're in California, what we're going to do. And Sutter said there was some good farming land. We're always looking for good farming land down at Santa Clara, which was somewhere down near Yerba Buena. Well, now, of course, we found out, we realized that we were in California, which was actually Mexico, and we were literally at war with the place where we had arrived. Well, so we couldn't sit there. We decided that we'd head on down to Santa Clara, like Sutter said. The oxen were pretty bad shape from pulling the wagons over the Sierra, so we figured they probably wouldn't make it any farther, so we hired some boats from Sutter and let him have the oxen, and we went down to Santa Clara by water. Well, again, things happened while we were on our way. We didn't know that right at that same time up in Sonoma, while we were in New Helvetia, Sonoma, Fremont stood up and declared that California was a republic. You see, it was on June 14th and it was separate from Mexico. And the war started getting nasty, they said, and when we got down to Santa Clara, Fremont had already been there and gone, and took most of the people away to fight General Castro farther south, who was a Mexican general. Then another fellow showed up, a guy named Joseph Elam. He was a captain, and he was looking for some more men to help Fremont. As I say, I was the old-timer in the group. Always seemed to be the old-timer. And I joined up with him, and we had some skirmishes with the Mexicans, but I'll skip over that because it didn't amount to a whole lot. We went out there, and we shot at them a whole lot, and they shot at us, and nobody hit anybody. You know, it was a kind of a neat war. There was one old dog got shot in the leg, but it didn't hurt him too bad because it was the leg he didn't use, you know. So it was a good war, so we all just took our rifles and went back home. By January 1847, the fighting pretty well died down around Santa Clara anyway, although we were still at war with Mexico and we were still in Mexican territory. But what I really wanted to do was, of course, what I've been wanting to do all along was to buy a farm and settle down. Well, I had the money, we're still in the clock, kept it from the Indians, but we were in this hostile territory. And they wouldn't sell to the Americanos. They keep the land with the Mexicans, or the Californios is what they call them. They wouldn't sell the Americanos. But we had to find some work. So we did find some work. There were some jobs to be had down in the Redwoods, place they called San Antonio, which is what you call or a canyon now. I don't know where I said Oregon. Canyon. In Yerba Buena, they were building over across the bay and they needed a lot of lumber, so they had to work there. And I was 50 years old now when I finally got this all started put together, and I was still traveling around the country, still working at odd jobs when I could find it like that. And I had a clock full of money, no farm. Well, and I didn't have a wife either, see, because my wife died. And so I took care of the last part first. I figured on July 1st, 1847, I married Margaret Elam. Margaret had come over in the wagon train with us, and she had been widowed then. And I married Margaret, and she's my wife now. She's sitting right around here someplace. Wave to us, Margaret. See, there's Margaret. Nice folks, aren't they, Margaret? We don't talk a lot anymore. Did plenty of it around before. I better get on here. Well, as I say, we were still at war with Mexico about this time, and we couldn't buy any land. And we were pretty happy, and the light's not too good here. We were pretty happy when we got the news that the American troops captured Mexico City. Remember, we're still, here's the old brown out here, still hadn't found his rancho yet, and then we got the Americans who were down capturing Mexico City. And we figured if they were capturing Mexico City, we ought to be all right. Well, I ran into a guy named William Leedsdorf one day when we used to have to cut the lumber and we'd row across the bay to build Yerba Buena with. Mr. Leedsdorf was a businessman over in Yerba Buena, did a lot of building. He was from the West Indies, and he owned land because he had taken Mexican citizenship so that he could own the land, you see. And he made loans and things like that. And there was a farmer soldier in the Spanish army named Candelario Valencia. And he had been granted this rancho called the Acalanes. Not this one where we are, but a rancho called the Acalanes. Well, that's what the Spanish government did, and the Mexican government did too. They never did have a whole lot of money, and after they fought a war, just were in the service for a while, well, they'd give them a land grant because they didn't know what else to do with land. So one of these grants was to Candelario Valencia. Well, Valencia owed Leedsdorf a bunch of money, couldn't pay it back, so Leedsdorf settled the loan by taking this rancho, which he'd never seen, and he's owned that rancho when I talked to him and told him that I wanted to buy a farm. He'd never seen the place, never cared about it, so he sold it to me right there on the spot that day for $900, and he threw in 300 head of cattle because he was from the West Indies. I say he didn't really care about whether Americanos had the land or not. He just wanted his money. Well, I rode back across the bay and told Margaret, and she got pretty excited about, finally we got a farm, but she hadn't seen the place. So I started sawing up some lumber that very same day to build a house out of, because we didn't know what this thing was going to look like. We'd never been up there. The fighting down in Mexico, we were still in Mexico, see, it was going on pretty hot and heavy, and we didn't get any news for a couple of months after it happened. So we figured it might just be better to stay on the redwoods. So I still had some work to cut up some more lumber until things settled down a little bit. This worked for a while until it turned 1848 then, and it was nice weather, and we decided to heck with it. We'd go ahead and move on up to the farm anyway, and this was 1848, February 7th, while we loaded up the wagons with the wood and everything else we had, and we moved up to this new place that we bought, which is the Rancho Acalanes. It was hard to find it. We only had this legal description of the rancho, which wasn't much good. It was all written in Spanish anyway, and we weren't really very sure what we got there. But when we figured we must be out in the middle of the rancho someplace, we stopped. It was a real pretty valley, and that February it was all nice and green. Looked just a lot like Missouri, actually, where we come from, but it was a whole lot prettier than Missouri. And the valley didn't have any name, so we called it Pleasant Valley because that's the way it was. After later, why we changed it to Jones Valley. And I'll tell you in a minute how come we changed it to Jones Valley. Eventually, why folks didn't like that either. They changed it to Happy Valley. Right here is one of the places that the history books start to go wrong, that starts to bother me a bit, because you can read right in the book today, it says something like this, and I'm going to quote here: Elam built the house while Margaret cooked dinner. I can't remember why that's in Slocum or which one that's in. That's bugged the hell out of me for a long time. It bugged Margaret a whole lot more than that. They count that as my first house, and I'm just going to tell you it ain't true. She cooked dinner, and I put up some canvas over some tree branches, which is where we spent the night. And some people call that a house. Call it a house if you want, but I can tell you that Margaret did call it a house. Well, folks also said later that Margaret and I were the first Americans in Contra Costa County after William Welch, and I reckon that's probably true. William Welch came in 1832, as I understood. It takes a kind of a stretch of imagination to say we were the first Americans in Contra Costa County, when at that time there wasn't any Contra Costa County, there wasn't any California, we were in Mexico. So it all depends on how you look at it. Remember I said history is gossip, isn't it? We were in Mexico, and the United States was at war with Mexico, you see, so we got a little bit uncomfortable about it all. So, but at any rate, the next day, I took the boards that I'd cut up down in San Antonio and started building a proper house for Margaret. Even so, it didn't amount to a whole lot, and had a dirt floor, and Margaret still didn't like it. She nagged about that house. For 143 years, she's been nagging about that house. Wave to the nice folks, will you, Margaret? She's all right. Well, we settled in that house, still not knowing what was going to happen with the war, whether we were going to be on our own land or not, and then we finally heard it ended back in February. Something we never did quite figure out, called the Treaty of Guadalupe, Hidalgo, and whatever that meant, we didn't hear about up where we were. The United States, they said, paid Mexico $15 million, and it turned out we were Americans again, and that was good. Well, I own this big rancho now. I see it was 3,000 acres, and I say I was up kind of long in years, so they sort of considered me the alcalde of the district, which was something like a mayor, although we didn't have a kind of a town or anything. Also, I had some experience with setting up governments. Every place I went in Illinois and Missouri, everywhere, I was setting up the government. So, by gosh, as soon as California was becoming a state, why, they tapped me again. After the war with Mexico was over, why, they held a constitutional convention to write up a constitution down in Monterey, and asked me if I'd go down and be a delegate since I was the old alcalde, so I went. And I went down there to Monterey and helped write the constitution. Stayed on there, served in the first couple of sessions of the legislature, but I got kind of tired of that. 1852, I got right out of politics. I figured 2 hitches in politics is enough for any man. Anybody that stays in any longer than that's got something wrong with him. So I got out of politics and I come back to Lafayette for good. I finally found a place that I wanted to settle, and the years were beginning to run out. I was 55 years old then. Well, about that time now they discovered gold up in Sutter's place, and for a time I thought about maybe taking a run up there and see if I could find something. Decided not to, and I don't have to tell you that Margaret wasn't too red hot on the idea either. So we started making some plans in earnest about what we were going to do about the farm, and we just found out that the place was pretty good for growing wheat. The whole area around here was good for growing wheat. We wanted to make bread. Am I holding it too close again, Master? We wanted to make bread. We had to have flour, which came from wheat, but in order to get flour from wheat, you got to grind it up. Well, the nearest flour mill was all the way down by the mission down in San Jose. Took a long wagon ride down there to get it down there and ground and get it back. So I looked around and to buy my own mill. I thought, I've got to have my own mill. I finally found one up in Benicia. It was a horse-drawn mill, and I bought it and brought it over on the ferry and hauled it down to the farm. I kept selling off pieces of land because we didn't have any way of having any money coming in. So whenever I had a chance, I sold off a piece of land. We had a whole lot more land with 3,000 acres than we ever needed, and I needed the money. And then we needed some neighbors too. Now the first fella that I sold the land to was old Nathaniel Jones. Nathaniel had come across the plains in the wagon train with us, and I offered to sell him 372 acres for $100, and he wouldn't buy that. I said, I'll name the whole valley after you. We'll change it from Pleasant Valley to Jones Valley. And finally he said, okay. He caved in and handed me the money. Then I guess he liked that. And he built a fine farm up there and planted around with a bunch of locust trees from some seeds he brought all the way across with him. And so everybody called that the Locust Farm. He was a nice fellow. He was a pretty good fella. He wasn't too sure of himself, the sort of person. He became the first sheriff of Contra Costa County later. Well, with all the new people moving in, and I had the only flour mill, now I had my horse-drawn flour mill, got so busy we wouldn't hardly keep up. So I figured it's time we got a new flour mill. And at any rate, way up in there in Jones Valley where we were was kind of far away from the main road. You see, the main road around these parts ran from Canyon up to Martinez. Not sort of where it runs now, it runs a little farther east, but that was where they hauled all the lumber up to the ships and things, stuff that they didn't haul to near the plant. And I figured that I ought to get the mill down there closer to that main road, be a lot more convenient. So I found a steam-powered mill, powered with steam, S-T-E-A-M. This is in 1853. Man, it was great, excuse me. Could grind wheat much faster than anything anybody had ever seen. And I took the money that I got from selling this land and bought this steam mill. Now, there's a little controversy about that steam mill. And I'll get into that for a minute, but I had a second good reason for wanting to put the steam mill down where we did, was it was down by the creek. Down by close to Lafayette Creek, and there was a lot more water in the creek, and that creek didn't dry up in the summertime like Jones Creek did. And if you're going to have a steam mill, you got to have water, or you're not going to have any steam. So I built the mill right down on the bank of the creek, and it was right behind where the Wayside Inn is, and Benjamin Shreve's old store building right down there. Everybody seemed to forget afterward that that mill was made out of steam, you know. And I'm not sure why. It was one of those things that, well, a little later on, there got another historical society called, you may have heard of it, it's called the Lafayette Historical Society. It's very well known in these parts. There's a fellow there that belongs to the society, and his name is Peters. And he found out about that steam mill, and mostly because he found the ledger up in the vault, in the big vault up in the library at Pleasant Hill. You can go up there and look at it if you ask for it. And it lists all the purchases that I made down there when I was down in Lafayette for oak firewood, because you had to be kind of crazy to buy oak firewood in the summertime to run the mill, but that's what I did. At any rate, I still don't know how they missed it, because it's right there on the map. There was a fellow came through in 1857 named Andrew Coffey, and he was a surveyor, and sometimes they're not too bright, and he spelled steam like stream, so he said it was a stream mill, and it might have confused him a little bit, but Andrew Coffey was a deputy U.S. government surveyor too, and the government had sent Coffey around to survey the land, and he located. Maybe I should explain that a little bit. As I said before, the grants, the Mexicans and the Spaniards had granted land to their soldiers lots of times because they didn't have any money. They gave them land, which they had a lot of. Then when the United States took over California, part of the agreement with this treaty of Guadalupe, Hidalgo, said that they have to respect all the private claims. Well, these ranchos were private claims because they had been granted to the private sector apart from the public sector. They had to verify the claims, and they were pretty tough to verify because the Mexicans didn't have any recorder's office sort of thing like we do, and oftentimes this would just be some kind of a letter from the Mexican governor to the individual that had applied for the rancho grant, and it didn't have very good boundaries. So when the United States came along and said, well, we have to do a little better than that, so they appointed surveyors to go out and survey these claims after the claim was verified as being authentic and legal. And that's what Andrew Coffey was doing. You see, he'd come down in 1857 to survey the boundaries of the Rancho Acalanes. Well, while Coffey was down there, Margaret was still way up in Jones Valley. Now I got the steam mill, you see, down by the creek. And there's Coffey out here surveying. Margaret's still up there in that house with a dirt floor, nagging, about that dang house again. And I've been riding back and forth every day for 3 years on horseback down to run the mill, so we decided we'd build a second house. And you look in the history books and they talk about Elam Brown's, that he's built his famous third house. You see, well, this was the second house. It was in 1856, and I built it down there closer to the mill. And then we went down there with Margaret. We picked out a nice spot. we faced that little square that we still got down here. That although people have cut it up quite a bit lately, but we'd set that aside for a park, and we had that nice little house. Started construction facing the square, and people still get kind of mixed up about where that second house was, and I'm going to tell you right now where that second house was. It was just south of that ugly building that they have on the corner there, where Huff used to have his hotel, but now it's the World Savings Building. It was just south of that. Well, now, see, we got the house up in Jones Valley, got the steam mill, and got this house building, and Coffey come around doing a survey, and one of the things you're supposed to show on the maps is anything like mills and houses where the owner lives. So he asked me where I lived, and I pointed out there and said, well, we got the house up in Jones Valley, and we got this one here that's almost ready. And so he put them both on the map. And you can go look at the map, and you'll find them both on there. You'll find the mill that I've got up in Jones Valley in the house, and you'll find the stream mill, although he wasn't too good a speller, and the house that I've got down here. And he plotted them on there just where they were supposed to be, right where he measured them. That was the second house. That's what I call the second house. Some people call it the third, but it was the second. Well, when I'm talking about the mills, I've got to say one other thing about mills. Go out here in Lafayette Park, as they call it, I think they call it now, you'll see a millstone, and there's brass plaque, very nice. Said Elam Brown's millstone. Well, it's Elam Brown's millstone, but it's the one from the horse thing up there. I mean, I didn't have that little bitty millstone for my big steam mill. You see, that was the millstone that's out in the square is the stone from my first mill, the little one. The big steam mill was eventually sold to an outfit in Stockton, and they came out and hauled it all away, and they weren't about to haul away a mill without the millstones. They took the millstones with them. So that one, not sure what that plaque says, but that's from the first one. But let me get back to the house. The second house was a lot better. First we had a floor. Margaret wanted a floor. But that year, we had a heck of a lot of rain, and it flooded the mill, flooded the house. We hadn't even moved into it yet. And Margaret came down there, and the water was standing all around the house, and said, well, that's not a very good place to build a house, you know. I had trouble with Margaret at that time. So we never moved into it. We started building the third house right away. Well, that got pretty mixed up later when they tried to track down the location of the houses. And I've got here in my notes this person, Peters, whoever he is, seemed like a pretty smart fellow. I don't know. Seemed like he talked to everybody that would know Alice Rusi and Fern Powell Davis and Leo Coleman and a whole bunch of others. And some of them absolutely swore that the house was in one place, and some of them absolutely swore the house was in another place, and they were both right. But what they didn't apparently weren't aware of was that there were two houses down there. Well, the third house, if you count the one I never lived in, is the second, which I do. The third house was finally torn down in 1929. It was in pretty bad shape by 1920, but nobody took very good care of it. I don't know. It wasn't like they did with George Washington's house in Mount Vernon. They still take good care of that, and they celebrate his birthday, but because, you know, they didn't take very good care of my house. So they tore it down in 1929. A bunch of bums lived in it. So there was a lot of confusion because of the way they were counted, but there was one other little bit of confusion that I'd like to clear up while I'm talking about the confusion. And some of the historical societies have a photograph, and they say that this photograph is Elam Brown's barn, and I'm here to tell you that it ain't Elam Brown's barn. You know, we had the barn over there behind the house. There was if you know where the Lafayette City Hall is, why the barn was over there between where the house was and City Hall was, and Margaret wanted it farther away from the house because, you know, barns tend to stink a little bit, but we didn't want to move it any farther away because there's an Indian graveyard right out there, and we didn't want to go down and mess around with those Indian bones, so we put it closer, but closer to the house, and we did get a little walk from once in a while, but the pictures that say that the Historical Society has, it says it's Elam Brown's barn, is taken from a place down in front of what they call the town hall. And if you go down there, and if you had the picture in one hand and you looked up there and the hill in the other, well, you'll find that there's a hill between where the barn was, my barn was located, and where the site and where you're standing. So all the hills, amazingly, even these days, you go look at the ridge line and the hills and the trees all look pretty much the same as it did back in 1850. But there's a hill in between my barn. I don't know whose barn that picture of, but it's not my barn. Well, we were living in the third house now. So say, remember, we're connecting our lives up with everything else that went on in the world. And there was another world apart from California we hear from it from time to time. And, well, we were living in the third house, and we got the word finally that Abraham Lincoln was elected president. We started out with George Washington being alive, to say now Abraham Lincoln, and then they had the war between the states. There was another war. Well, we were pretty far out of it out here. This time we had really moved out and missed it pretty well, but we're getting pretty sick of wars. And there's a lot even worse news we got in 1865 that Lincoln got assassinated. Well, about that time the war ended, and we breathed a big sigh of relief. For then the mill thing was going real good. We pretty well missed out on the war, and I didn't want to mess with it. I already fought in the Mexican War, even though I'd never been in the Army, if you call that fighting down there. Well, I died in that third house in 1889 when when I was 92 years old, August 10th, 1889. We didn't own very much land anymore by that time. Most of it had been pretty well sold off. And most of what we had was around that third house, is what they called the home ranch. To keep it from getting confused, because we still own some other parcels around in the area. Then after I died, they sent the surveyors to survey the home ranch again for the probate proceedings, so they could tell what was left. And that surveyor tied in my third house, which, as I say, my house that I died in, which was my third house. The second house was still there, but it was just being used for storage, and it didn't show on the map as my house. So that's why I figured that everybody got so mixed up for so many years, and so many arguments about where the house was. Got settled when they plotted it all up with a computer and figured this thing out that I just told you about. Well, they went out just so that they wouldn't forget where it was again. Why the Lafayette Historical Society went out there and built a fine monument on the house, got a good picture of it right on the plaque, and it's right out in front of, on Lafayette Circle, right out in front of Petar's restaurant. And sure please me if you might go out there and stop by sometime and take a look at it. Say hello to Margaret and me. They had a big ceremony back in August 1981, and they had all the city officials and the mayor and everything were there, and Margaret and I came down, and we were very proud. We stood back at the back edge of the crowd. Nobody saw us, I don't believe. So time goes on. We still have wars. I guess just had another one. To say, I just have to remember that this is the way life goes, and just to show you how we just fill in a gap from one war or another. When I was born, George Washington was around, and the year I died, why, Adolf Hitler was born, and we try to hang in there fill in the gap from George Washington to Abraham Lincoln to Adolf Hitler. And so that's a real story, and thanks for coming by. How'd I do, Margaret? Thank you, folks.
Brown, thank you very much. And Mrs. Brown, we are delighted that you were able to come. We know that although your husband is very witty, he skipped a few important things, like the fact that not only did you both raise your own families, but you took in children of many other families, children who lost their parents, for instance, in crossing the plains. So that some people in town affectionately called you Mother and Father Brown. And there's some wonderful tales about that. Many people were proud of that line, which is really an adopted line of Browns. Thank you very much.